Thank you. Are we good to go?
We are ready, Mayor Walker.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. I call this meeting to order and I'll turn it over to Dr. Richardson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and to the public. We're here again to have our another one of our budget work sessions. And I'm going to go ahead and move this meeting forward and turn it over to Dr. Atkins so she can begin with her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. So good afternoon, Dr. Richardson, council persons, and Mayor Walker. What I'd like to do, and Brian, I'm ready for the first slide. I'd like to talk to you about our funding request from City Council. Dr. Richardson asked us, in light of the downturn of the economy, if we would roll back our budget request for FY21 to level funding in FY20. So what I'd like to do is present tonight what the FY20 funding looks like and what the expenses for FY21 are projected to be, and then the request from City Council. So I'd like to start with our revenue estimate summary. For FY20, our funding from City Council, the appropriation was $57,366. We had anticipated requesting from City Council a little over $3 million, $3.4 million. With the request from Dr. Richardson, we have taken out the $3.4 million request, bringing us back to the funding in FY20, the $57,366,000. We also looked at state funding. For FY20, we received $20,857 from the state. We were anticipating to receive a little over $400,000 for FY21 from the state. However, we have been notified that allocation will be reduced also. The General Assembly met on April 22nd and approved a revised funding request from the governor. And so Charlottesville City Schools is scheduled to receive $242,000 less, right around $243,000 less in state funding than we had anticipated. So that brings our roll forward anticipated amount to $21,014,000 from the state. From FY19, we have a fund balance of $720,000 that we would roll forward to include in FY21. Now we have local dollars, and those dollars come into our operating budget and go right back out. That $3.1 million is represented by tuition that we receive from out of district. It also includes funding for our regional special education program, excuse me, known as the PrEP program. And then our federal funding for FY21 is about the same as we've received for FY20. We anticipate $5,280,000, bringing us to a reduction of $3.6 million, and then a roll back funding anticipation for FY21 of $87,550,000. And I would draw your attention to that this does not include the $468,000 for our gifted teachers. Next slide. So now we're looking at what our non-discretionary and critical expenses are for FY21. The Virginia retirement system, the employer share of that cost has increased by $811,000 for FY21. Each year, our health insurance, again, the employer cost has increased, and this year we're going to realize $686,000 increase. Telecommunications, each year we get E-rate reimbursement from the federal government, and over a period of time, that E-rate reimbursement reduces successively over the years. And so for FY21, we're anticipating a reduction of $61,000 in the telecommunications. And each year we go in and look at our enrollment, and we make adjustments for enrollment. So the adjustments that we have to make for enrollment, $332,000. And then during the spring, late winter, early spring, we had a technology audit done. There were a number of school divisions and localities that had some breaches in security. So we thought it was prudent to have an audit done. That audit recommended several changes for us. And one of them is a security upgrade that will cost us $49,000, right at $50,000. So our non-discretionary and critical expenses for FY21, $1,942,000. Next slide. So when we put the revenue and the expenses together, we anticipate for FY21 that our revenue will be the $87,550,000. Our expenses during that time would be the roll forward from FY20, $88,055,000. To that, we have to add $1,942,000, bringing us to the $90,465,000 in expenses. So the net between that expense, the revenue and expense, is $2,915,000. Our carry forward enrollment-based cuts, looking at each school individually and what we project the enrollment will be. Some places we have to increase staffing, some places we decrease staffing, but the roll forward of that would be $409,000 less than we had in FY20. So now the gap, not taking into consideration any of the losses that we might realize in lottery or sales tax, the gap would be $2,506,000. We would also have to ask for reappropriation of the supplemental funding for our gifted program, which is $468,000. Additional estimated city requests, $875,000. So our total estimated request for the FY21 from the city would be $1,343,000. And that would leave the Charlottesville City Schools a remaining gap of $1.1 million that we would have to make cuts in those areas. We have been notified that we'll be receiving stimulus funding, $1.2 million in stimulus funding. Because stimulus funding is one-time funding, we would not recommend putting that into our operating budget to cover expenses for salaries and ongoing recurring costs because it is one-time funding. We are recommending to our school board that we use the stimulus funding to cover any loss that we might realize starting as early as July 1 in sales tax revenue and any loss that we may receive in lottery funds. So I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Counselor, do you have questions?
I have a question. It's actually probably for our staff related to the schools. Mr. Oberdorfer, could you kind of explain how the maintenance and transportation budgets, or somebody, budget team, whomever can take this, how that's kind of managed and how that kind of flows into their overall budget? That's a question that's come up when I've talked to school board members, and I'm also just curious to understand a little bit more about how maybe savings are realized in those areas. I guess it's all done within city dollars and what impact that has on the schools. So if someone on staff could field that question, I'd appreciate it.
I can't speak to the council directly, but I can say that the funding is essentially a reimbursement back to the city for services that are provided. For instance, with the maintenance folks, as they go out and they do maintenance repairs or preventive maintenance, those charges are charged back to the account So at the end of the year, that it should equalize out. And typically, I don't think we see a savings. You could ask the budget office, but I don't think typically we do see any savings.
Any other questions?
I have a question about the CARES money. If there was any CARES money, so right now, as I understand it, the plan for the CARES money is to be put aside to cover money that is lost from sales tax revenue and lottery funds, in addition to this $1.1 million gap, if we approve the additional 1.3.
And Council Person McGill, let me see if I can rephrase what you ask. The CARES Act funding, the $1.2 million, we would use to cover any sales tax revenue decrease that we have, lottery funding decrease, and any other of the one-time expenses that we might realize during the school year. We do anticipate, because we've had such a large deployment of devices to our students, that we probably will realize some loss and damage with that we'll need to replace in order to continue with the online learning. But this sales tax revenue, lottery funding would be priorities, and then those other expenses to allow us to continue with the online learning.
And so right now it's a total of 2.4 million in the gap, correct? If you include what you're asking for the city and what you're looking to cut.
Yes, 2.5.
And that is not taking into any account any additional losses for sales, potential losses for sales tax or lottery revenue, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And that, what is that money normally used for, the sales tax and lottery?
That's a part of our operating budget. We include that in the total amount of our operating budget. And the reason we can track that so closely and we have to anticipate is because that revenue, the sales tax revenue, comes in monthly. And it is a 2-month lag in receiving it. It's based on sales tax revenue going into the state, and that what the state collects from the localities on a 2-month lag. So what we receive in July, what we will receive in June will be based on what happened in April, the sales taxes that were collected in April.
And Dr. Atkins, in some of our earlier conversations, you did indicate, could you explain the process for how you kind of estimate those things? It sounds like those are conversations that are happening across the Commonwealth, and these are just some standards that are followed, just for the public's understanding.
You're correct.
What kind of losses we're going to have?
Yes, we have, with the lottery funds, one of the estimates that we have received so far is that in March, which the state only realized about a half of a month, 2 weeks of shutdown, the lottery funds revenues came in 30% less than it did the previous year for the same time. With sales tax, we have asked the state several times to give us estimates of what they anticipate the sales tax revenue might look like. And they are, because it doesn't come through the Department of Education, it comes through the Tax Revenue Office. We have not been able to get that. However, we went back and looked at our tax revenue last year around this time. And we also went back a little further to look at prior to the state implementing the e-commerce sales tax, and just did an estimate. We rolled our revenue back about 30%.
Dr. Atkins.
Some of our colleagues across the Commonwealth also, and they rolled theirs back about 30% also.
Dr. Atkins, Brian Wheeler with City Communications. Kim Powell has raised her hand. Would you like to have her join the conversation?
Yes, please.
Kim, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to share that our finance director, Renee Hoover, shared with me yesterday an email string that was being circulated by VGOFA, which is the Virginia Governmental Finance Officers Association. And we were seeing minimum of 20-25% estimates for sales tax loss from the different localities. On top of that, there is the 30% loss that we've been advised about as far as the way the lottery was tracking as of March. That $1 million for us, when we ran those calculations early on, and this was about a month ago, but that really only represents about 16% of our sales tax. So it's a fairly conservative that when we talk about using CARES money to offset losses in sales tax and lottery revenue losses, that's really a fairly conservative estimate. And it's in the ballpark of what we're seeing definitely from other localities. No one knows for sure, of course, what the future holds, but.
Councilman Hill, one of the areas of concern that we have is because there is a 2-month delay on that sales tax revenue. If we move into July, it will then be based that July revenue will be based on May. And we are very concerned that's a full month of shutdown from the state. And if we roll in the CARES funding to balance our budget, we will immediately be at a deficit and have to come back to City Council to ask for another appropriation.
Because you indicated, I think on Monday night, that it's a monthly cycle in which you get reimbursement for CARES funding.
Every monthly cycle that we get sales tax revenue.
Okay.
Yes.
How does the CARES stimulus, is that just given as a lump sum?
It is given as a lump sum. It still is you will still appropriate that. We believe we're still getting guidance on that. We don't think it will come directly to the schools. It will still come through the city and the city will have to appropriate it to us. We have received some federal and state guidance on how to use that funding. One of the recommendations that the state is making to us is to be very, very, very cautious about using it for recurring costs. So there's a list of items that are highly recommended that we use it for. And some of that includes technology for our students, for nutrition, for those emergency kinds of operations that we had to put in place because of COVID.
Ask a question about the sales tax assumptions that you're making. The city, and this is based on our revenue assumptions, as I think are a product of Commissioner Revenue Divers and Treasurer Jason Vandiver. Our projections are that we are projecting reduced April collections of sales tax to about 75% of the original projections in April, in May to about 70% of original projections, and thereafter about a 5 to 10% increase monthly until the assumption is that by the end of the year we'll be back up to more or less normal. I'm wondering what the assumptions are that your office is using and whether they line up with or correspond with the projections that are being made by folks in City Hall.
That's a great question. The assumptions that we are using are not scientific at all. It is that the state is shut down. And we know by that our sales tax revenue that was being generated while they were fully operational is not being generated. So in anticipation of what that might look like, we, along with a conservative number to estimate the decline. There is an analyst, a financial analyst that works with Virginia First Cities, Jim Regenball, who also does some projections on what sales tax revenue may look like. And he's projecting numbers close to the ones that we have.
And Councilor Snook, just for a little bit of clarity, I had a similar question, and I contacted someone, the State Department of Education, just as to how that sales tax was based. Was it based on local sales or statewide or some combination? And this is based not on the local collections. It's based on statewide collections, and then it takes into account the number of students in the school system as part of the whole population of students throughout the state. So it's kind of a combination of factors. It's not so I was wondering why they were not matching up with what we were doing, but it's because there is a statewide component to this projection as well.
So when we talk in City Hall about a reduction of sales tax revenue, that number isn't going to match what the school board is referring to when they talk about a reduction of sales tax revenue.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Because it does account statewide and potentially areas that are taking a harder hit than the
different
city.
Formulas. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm assuming that's so that people who are in poor areas don't get dinged and have worse school systems than people who are in higher income areas. At least that's supposed to be the principle.
I'm not sure that is the case.
Not sure of the philosophy behind that. Yeah.
I'm not sure of that one. Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Atkins. This is Letitia. I had a question concerning your presentation on the non-discretionary and critical expenses. It seems that if your total has increased about 166,000 since we last spoke. Can you address what that is?
Yeah, well, the budget is never final until it is final. And as our principals are working through their master's schedule, one of the areas that we have focused on has been in equity. And this year we've seen a big change in equity in our orchestra program at Walker, starting in our 5th and 6th grade. So we saw large numbers increase. And as the principal at Beaufort is working on his master's schedule, he will almost double the number of students that will need to be enrolled in engineering. We doubled the number of engineers. We opened a new engineering program this year at Walker, pre-engineering. So the students who are in the pre-engineering program will be moving up to Beaufort to be in their engineering program. And at Beaufort, we currently only have one teacher, so we'll need a second teacher in the engineering program. Also, we had at Lugo McGinnis Academy, we have a teacher, a special education teacher, and the students who are currently enrolled, who will be in the program for FY21, will not need the special education teacher. So that teacher moved over to Beaufort. They do need a math teacher. So that left an opening there after the special education teacher was moved over to Beaufort. So we will have to replace that teacher with a math teacher. So those are the 2 additional positions that we had to put in the budget. And the total on that is 166,000. So it is, it's accounted for in the enrollment.
So it's that 332. Was that the number?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, it was previously 166,780, and before your explanation, you had the Beaufort engineering teacher in that, along with a ELL teacher.
We have an ELL. So let me tell you which positions we have, and then the total positions is an ELL teacher, English as a second language teacher, which is required by the SOQ, which is the standards of quality by the state. That ratio increased. We have an engineering teacher. We have a math teacher, and I'm looking at we have one more teacher that's in.
Dr. Atkins, I can answer that if you'd like.
Is that the orchestra teacher?
It's orchestra.
Thank
right.
you.
It's the orchestra. The 2 that were in there from the original budget proposal were the Beaufort engineering and the ELL, because those were known about earlier in our budget process. The 2 that emerged as we have continued on planning for next year were the Walker Orchestra and then the need for additional sped resources at Buford, which then created the math need at LMA that we're actually going to need to hire for. So those are the four. And we use a cost factor of about $83,000 per teacher when we have to hire a new one. That's salary and benefits all included.
So the total number of those teachers for enrollment are 4.
Correct. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions?
I know we got into some of it on Monday, but just obviously, I think by tomorrow we'll have a better sense of what some of these cuts are. Looking at this remaining cuts that they're doing on their side, and I'm just trying to get our heads around what that looks like. And it's just going to take us, I think, a little more time once that's been discussed by the school board for us to kind of grapple with that. But beyond that, I don't have any immediate questions right now until we kind of have that information.
I anticipate tomorrow night we'll have our school board meeting, and there's some sequencing in how we make those cuts. Once the board has finished with all of its deliberations tomorrow, and gives us the go-ahead policy-wise to start making the cuts, we anticipate and contacting employees on Monday who are involved. I will tell you that our intent is to use attrition for those cuts. We have $1.1 million in cuts that we'll have to make. So to use as much attrition as possible and to move our employees around to try to keep them employed. Our desire is to not cause anyone not to be employed.
So can I just make sure that I'm clear? And in summary, if we were to give you the additional $1.3 million, then you would use the additional CARES Act funding to offset the expected declines in revenues from state lottery and sales tax. And that still leaves you with a $1.163 million shortfall that you would have to remedy by either by anticipating some attrition or by making some cuts.
That's correct. Let me add a little bit to that CARES Act. We use it for shortfalls in lottery, sales tax, device replacement to support nutrition, all of those services that we have in place. We prioritize those and use them in a priority, or use the funding in a priority order.
And that, but it is your expectation, having analyzed the issue and your financial people having analyzed it, that those three things, sales tax revenues, lottery tax revenues, and the anticipated technology expenses and other related expenses are going to basically eat up the $1.2 million from the CARES Act.
We anticipate it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't know, I haven't gone back yet to watch the meeting from the other night, but did you all land on an amount? I mean, we know that the 468 is included there. Was there any other conversation about any additional fund? Did you all ask Dr. Richardson to just go ahead and just ensure that they, fully understand that the 468 was going to be committed? What happened?
Mayor Walker,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to address that in my presentation.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. Well, any other questions?
I have no other questions.
Okay.
Mayor Walker, this is Brian Wheeler. We did have one question from a school board member. It's visible in the Q&A module right now. I don't know if somebody wants to take that up.
I can read it. I'm wondering about the contracts with the city for student transportation, to follow up on what I guess I asked. Wondering if shouldn't there be some left over this year, since we are not transporting students as normal, and it would be helpful to have a more detailed accounting of what's been sent so far and what may be left in that regard.
So the driver should all still be getting paid, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But there's like gas and operation and maintenance considerations.
I don't know about gas. The maintenance will probably maybe not as frequently, but still need to happen. But I just wanted to make sure people were still employed. And so gas is probably the big one, right?
I can speak to that. It's about $9,000 a month.
9,000 a month that we save, or that we 9,000. What's that mean?
9,000 a month current savings expected.
And those are savings that the city at this point has. We're saving the city is saving 9,000 a month. And so in theory, if we close down that operation in March, we would have at least 2.5 months worth of $9,000.
That's correct. And I believe, again, it's a chargeback situation.
I'm sorry, we actually pay in advance. Everything, all the contracts are paid up front at the beginning of the year in full.
It's a chargeback from, I'm sorry, it's Garland Williams. I'm over pupil transportation also. It's a chargeback to Public Works from CAT's budget. But yes, schools, they send over all of the money in the beginning of the year.
So just to clarify also, the school pupil transportation is a contracted service. So it's a fee that is established at the beginning of the year. It's not a one-for-one necessarily, because sometimes when we're developing the budget and by the time we give the schools a contracted amount, it does not include, for example, any merit increases that the city council may or may not approve with the passing of that budget. There are also some other expenses that were in this year that were not covered in the original contract that went in the school amount for special needs transportation. So those two items were both not included. So even though we did have some fuel savings, there were some other operational costs that were not originally in the contracted amount. And similarly, in years when there have been overruns, we don't go back to the schools and ask for additional money to cover that. So it's a give or take in both situations.
Okay. All right, I think I have some questions, but I'm going to ask them. I'm going to think about it a little bit and ask it at the end.
So right now, Nakia, Dr. Richardson's going to go through something. I don't think we're done with talking about schools.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and Dr. Atkins, I know that you probably have other things to do. So maybe if you can't stay on, that by the time we get back around to the discussion part, if we could just contact you if we need it. If you can stick around, that's fine. But we may have questions later.
I'll be happy to stick around. I'll hang in.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and move on with our presentation on our side. And what I want to do is just basically give a recap to the public and to you, City Council, about basically what we talked about on Monday, but just a recap of where we're at with our proposed budget. And I'm just going to start off by talking about our originally proposed budget. We talked about before was 196 million. With all the issues in terms of the economy, we took it down to 191 million. So now we're at about a $5 million decrease between those two budgets from the original to the revised. Moving on, as we said before, we'll maintain our current tax rate at FY20 numbers. If you look down, the FY21 tax revenue decreases. That's about $2.3 million, inclusive of sales, meals, and lodging. And then I have also listed the other revenue losses that we are planning to experience in 21. The other big one is the business and professional licenses, which we call BPOL, at $2 million. And as you can see, we have other funding sources that will be decreased going into 21 with state revenues and other revenue sources that we have. Moving on, as you can see, that our departmental decrease will be a total of 2.6 million. from FY20 going into FY21 from our originally proposed budget with the schools. That was one of the areas I was going to talk about with the contributions. As you can remember, on Monday, it was at 2.1 million. It's down to 1.7 million. And you can look at that adjustment in the next line where we had 7.9 million held in our reserve, and we took that down to 7.5, which will cover the appropriation for the gifted teachers in that particular line item, but it's taking down our reserve. And then moving on in terms of the human sources nonprofits, the budget level that we went back to was FY20, and as you asked us to break it out from what our contributions were from the Vibrant Community Fund, and then what is allocated for arts and culture. And you have that there. Our FY21 capital improvement program, as you can see, the total proposed CIP is $25 million, $25.7 million. Our FY21 plans in terms of bond funded projects as originally proposed, as you can see, the district court project, we got those broken out into those 2 years. Primarily is because we had a conversation with the county. We previously appropriated $500,000 to them, and then another $300,000 will go in FY21, which will total about $800,000, which is 34% of the design. We'll have to come back in FY22 and fund it in the amount of $6 million. Our other cash funded projects that have been deferred, and these are the few exceptions. One is the housing vouchers, and that was at $900,000. The small cap for schools was about $200,000. The downtown mall infrastructure is $93,000. And remember, that revenue comes from the downtown mall vendors. And then also to the public access TV, which is about $40,000 for fiscal year 21, which comes from the PEG funds. Then going back in terms of our Vibrant Community Fund, as we discussed before, those allocations will be based upon the availability of funding and provision of services in the upcoming fiscal year. And council, you'll still have those discussions, and that'll be coming up soon. We are in the process of still gathering information to be able to present to you in terms of, the programs that are in need of the funding. Going on to our budget amendments, as we talked about before, these will be based upon the economy. Our team will continue to work on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to talk about our overall revenues and expenditures. And then from that, we'll come back to the council and talk about any issues in terms of revenue losses that we may have experienced or projecting to experience for that particular month. So we are working throughout the week to make sure that we are looking at our overall revenues and expenditures. Today, which will go into the night, we wanted to talk about here are the key points to talk about today is basically, we talked about our overall budget and where we're at. You had discussion with the directors and the 221s, and based on explanation of how we're faring in terms of our FY21 dollars that we'll be able to spend using the FY20 expenditure budget, but also to the additional funding for city schools, number one. And then number two is the capital improvement program. Basically just going along as we present it in terms of what our plan is to move forward with the capital program. And then lastly, just giving some updated calendar dates so everyone will be aware of that. And moving on to the 18th is the public hearing on the budget which will be the first reading. And then we'll go for final budget approval for June 1st. And then also too, the public can go to our budget page where you can find information that pertains to our budget. And that concludes what I have for you today. And I turn it back over to you, Mayor Walker.
All right. Thank you. I do have some questions about some of those changes, and specifically to start the housing vouchers.
Yes.
So we're not going to add dollars to that, and I was going to comment on this the other night, but I thought that we were going to be, have a conversation about that. If we're not going to add additional dollars to that, it's not fair for it not to be open to other families. I understand during a pandemic that would remain stable, but we will have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. If we're only going to give families like a 2-year, the 2-year cycle, which is what it was supposed to be, not extend that and then give other families the opportunity for it, then the families who were able to get in first are the only families that benefit this. So we're either gonna have to add to it or cycle families through it. And so I hope that it just wasn't extended for another 2-year period without taking that into consideration. Because if we're just assisting, then a set of families getting a 2-year break and then another set of families getting a 2-year break, but we can't not add and continue only funding the families that are currently in there. And I don't know what that looks like for this year, but I mean, I get it. I understand it all, and I wish we had money. And if we do have money, I would be the first to advocate for it. But we just can't limit it to just 2 years, just for the people who signed up first.
So you're talking less about the dollar amount as much as the process by which it's administered and to allow for more families to
talk about both, but if we're not going to add dollars to it, then we need to make sure that it's a fair process so that citizens, maybe they can apply for it again after the next 2-year cycle goes through. And I don't think everybody is on the same 2-year cycle. So some people would be rolling off of their 2 years before other people. But we just need to look at this as in, if we're not going to add to it, which I think we should, but if we don't have the resources to do that, we need to ensure that there's some equity for other families in the equation. There's a lot of families in this city who's having a hard time paying their, rent. And if we only let the people who are currently on there stay on there, then no one else will get the benefit. And a 2-year break is better than nothing, right? And I understand families may be used to that break, but we also have to think about the other families who never had that opportunity.
So more like a transitional housing model versus a Section 8 model?
Well, the initial contract, it was guaranteed for a 2-year period. So the way that it was set up, it was supposed to be like a 2-year period, 24 months worth of funding. Is that the case? Yes, right?
Mayor Walker, can I just clarify? Brenda Kelly's not on the call, and we can get these exact answers for you. Okay. But I just want to be clear. So we did include the $900,000 in the CIP to fund the vouchers, and that's consistent with what we've had in the 5-year plan for each year. Mm-hmm. I think that I might be mistaken. Again, we will get clarification from Brenda on this, but I believe that all of those dollars are not necessarily allocated, that there is some room for additional vouchers there, but we'll verify that for you. And I just wanted to make sure you were clear that it was $900,000 all included, right?
Yes, but it would be $900,000 the way that was written for the same families, we're not adding an additional 900,000.
That I'm not sure about, and we can clarify with Brenda, but I do think there's some room in that 900,000. I think there are currently 90 families being served, and I don't think that consumes the entire 900,000, but we'll clarify.
But
Brenda's
Mr.
on the Brenda's on the line.
Brenda's on the
Mr.
line.
Sales is also on.
Okay. If Brenda can
And
speak to that.
Or John.
But I think it's 800,000 that is already allocated.
Okay, you know more than me then. I just wanted to make sure.
And fees, right?
I'm
Brenda.
happy to address it if you want.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So the certification of the program is 2 years. So I think that's where the 2 years comes from. The intent of the program was to keep people housed, and hopefully the people become higher incomes that they roll out of the program, and that way you roll new families or households into the program. So currently there's about 80 some vouchers issued. Our estimates have been we should be able to get up to about 110 vouchers. So I know the Housing Authority is still working on trying to get more vouchers in the program. But again, the intent of the program is to keep people housed.
Mhm. So the 2-year cycle, we know that would be difficult for most people to increase their income, even in a 2-year period in Charlottesville, Virginia, where with our current AMI, which is over $90,000 now. So.
Correct. And that's why in the agreement, it's a 2-year recertification. So it cut down a little bit on the administration of the program, but I believe Housing Authority has been recertifying the incomes every year.
Yeah.
But that's why we put in the agreement, it was a 2-year recertification because we knew it would be a longer process for the rise in the income.
Okay.
And just, is it accurate that this 900,000 was zeroed out until the CARES Act money for CAT came, and then this was added back in?
It was on an original version of the CIP. You are correct. It was zeroed out. It was simply an omission on our part when we went through, because we were working from the idea that we were deferring all cash funded projects until we had a work session, and we basically said, oh gosh, this is something that we can't defer. So we added it back in. The only way that the CAT and CARES conversation came back in was that was a big chunk of money that we no longer needed to transfer to CAT. And so we just reprogrammed it as part of the cash contribution to the CIP. But we would have had to add it in regardless. It would have just come out of the reserve.
Okay. And then what if any connection does this program have with HUD in terms of having to follow sort of their regulations and some of their requirements about administering voucher programs, which I know can be pretty frustrating and stringent?
So the agreement we have in place with Housing Authority uses the HUD guidelines to administer this voucher program. So they're basically administering it the same as they do their Housing Choice Voucher Program. We did make one exception when you all approved the agreement about a year ago, when we amended it to allow different types of housing units to also be included in the program to free up more access to units. That's about the only change. There's difference. HUD does request annual recertification, income recertification. And again, our agreement only requires every 2-year income recertification, but Housing Authority has been following the annual recertification also under the city-funded program.
And a question I had from Monday, how much are we now going to transfer annually? I know that 79,000, I think it was over the course from after the HUD review, but how is it going to be? It's not 79,000 a year, is it?
It's 7.5% of the funding that we allocate for the program. So I think that comes out like 54,000, I think. And HUD is typically at about 9%. So we may have to revisit that if HUD still has some issues.
Okay.
I've got two questions regarding that. One, if that continues to be an issue, could we potentially move that in-house? And could Mr. Sales, could that go into his, I guess, department?
We, of course, we'd have to talk to administration about that, and there would probably be some additional staffing needs. And that's why we did do the administration over to the Housing Authority, because it is quite a bit of burden on administration, and they already do the process. That's why they offered basically, in 2017 when the program was approved.
I was just wondering, in case it starts becoming, if HUD starts deciding that they really don't like their people doing it.
Yeah, HUD had the concern that federal dollars were going to fund a city-funded program with administration.
Well, it's just the staff person's time, right, is what their
Correct.
concern was.
Correct.
But they hire a new person.
I think they do have an additional person on, or they've been putting it basically under a couple staff people, but they have one person now allocated specifically for that.
Okay.
The other question I had is, do you know if this is, since this is being run similar to the HUD-based voucher system, are we also, the barrier crimes that HUD requires, are those also what we're requiring?
I don't know the answer to that. I would have to find out as to the specifics of that kind of administration.
I think at this time they are, based on the conversations that I've been a part of. Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments before we open it up for public comments?
I guess another potential budget item, even though I know we don't want to think about new things to add on, is just, we got an email about the city's emergency fund, which is already depleted, and I think the number is around $150,000 to $160,000 of already existing backlogs of requests through that emergency fund that cannot be met. And I guess just throwing it out there, if there is any potential interest in trying to provide any additional funding for that fund to try and meet some of that unmet need, while recognizing that we're already having to make cuts, and it's not a time when we want to be thinking about new things to add on, but that's certainly, I think, a major priority, especially thinking about like the most immediate emergency needs created by COVID-19.
And I start.
Go ahead, man.
Well, we started. Well, you can go ahead. No, I'm going to say the same thing.
Mayor Walker and I, we've talked about that today, and that's something we're going to be looking into. I'm looking into it with staff in terms of being able to find other sources so we don't have to impact our reserve funds.
I was also curious, can any of the vibrant community funds be used for that? What's the constraints on that?
I mean,
Well, we could allocate. I think we would need to wait to.
I'm saying right now, I'm just asking if we can't find another sources, is that a source? Because it's along the same lines. I'm just asking.
Yeah, we could, but we will. Oh, well, Ryan is. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I was just going to say, we have that $2.1 million pot, and as part of that 2.1 under the Vibrant Community Funds, roughly $86,000, I believe is the amount we have in there now, was from the Emergency Assistance Fund program. So we, as we're reviewing that, we could definitely look at it and increase that amount from what we had traditionally been funding around the $85,000 mark to additional funding, whatever council wishes. But it's just, it would all, obviously, it would all come from that same pot. So, you give to one, you'd have to take from another. So it would be balancing council's priorities. But if this is the priority, then council could definitely allocate some of those funds, some additional funds towards that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
So just procedurally, Mayor Walker, we're just going to go and do public comment, and then we can do the other discussion points around the capital program in schools.
Yes.
Okay.
I had one final question. So if the discussion around the $900,000 for funding the voucher program, if the decision was made that could not be deferred before even the stimulus money for the CARES Act for CAT came in, would it be accurate to say that there was a plan to fund that with $900,000 removed from the reserve absent CARES Act money?
I would say yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Wheeler, we can open it up for public comments.
If you'd like to,
Go ahead.
if you'd like to speak to council, you can click the raise your hand icon, and that will put you in line. And Mayor Walker will bring you into the meeting. Right now, we have one person who's raised their hand. That's Peter Krebs. Peter, you're live with council. You've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. And really, thank you, Council, for just everything you're doing these days. This is incredibly difficult times, and I also think it's important to acknowledge your staff who are working in a very difficult situation and are handling it admirably. So thanks. And additionally, a big shout out to the Parks Department who are keeping the trails open, putting signs up to help people stay safe and everything. It's really important. Thanks. And we're actually seeing just tons and tons of people out using the outdoors. You're seeing it with your eyes. You're reading it in the paper. There's actually data indicating, 4 times as many people are using John Warner this year versus last year. 3 times as many people are using Riverview. The numbers are pretty astounding. And we've been talking about the importance of infrastructure for walking and biking as a vital public health resource. And we're really seeing that play out right now. In fact, there's even clear research indicating that people who exercise regularly produce an enzyme that reduces the severity of COVID-19. So these are things we knew. Now that there's data, and not even to mention stress and stress management and the important role that plays. So thank you. And this is all stuff that you guys know already, and I'm simply stating it to remind you to keep it in mind as you're making difficult choices ahead. And also, we'll need to think of creative ways to use the resources that we have. Working with staff to, for example, widen sidewalks by reassigning unused vehicle lanes or leveraging stimulus funds, streamlining project management. All those sort of non-budget things are going to become really important in the future. So, thank you for everything. And in this difficult time, it's important to remember that we're surrounded by, dedicated staff and an engaged public, and we're all going to get through this together. And thank you for your work. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, next up is Brandon Collins. Brandon, you're live. You can unmute your microphone and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, everybody. I fully appreciate the hard work you guys are dealing with this budget. I know it was hard doing it just in general, and now with all this. I just wanted to briefly get at the CSRAP, the city voucher program. People always get confused by it, but I think Brenda Kelly gave a pretty good explanation of how that works. I do think it might be a place to look and adapt to be able to meet the need for folks as we come out of this, as the financial hardships increase on renters. There might be a way to, if you could fund that program more, to adapt it to also include some kind of rent relief for renters in private housing. You might see a proposal for something like that coming up soon through the CDBG application. But it really, I think it points to, the wider need for a coordinated housing strategy. I think the HAC, which created the CSRAP program and did a really good job of doing so, would be a really good policy body to consider how you might adapt that program to provide rent relief and meet the needs of the community. There's a lot to consider with this housing crisis that's just going to explode here soon. And I know y'all don't have a lot of money, but we need to have a coordinated approach and a full understanding of all the different types of money that can help everybody work together to make sure we're not missing something or we're not overtaxing somebody like TJAC who have hotel rooms. But there's going to come a time when people got to move out of those hotel rooms, and where are those folks going to go, right? They're just going to go right back into homelessness. So, we all got to work together to prioritize this housing issue. And I hope you can make, at the very least, protect CSRAP in your budget, but, coordinate efforts and find the funding to make sure things can happen. I wanted to say one other thing about CSRAP. It mirrors the Housing Choice Voucher Admin Plan. That, along with Public Housing ACOP, has been slated for a revision to remove a lot of the barriers concerning people's criminal backgrounds. It's a tricky subject with residents, about who they want in their communities. So we've done some work on that and had been kind of moving towards having both those documents being revised as redevelopment, in anticipation of redevelopment. Of course, everything's kind of been on hold now, but there's been a longstanding desire by FAR and the Housing Authority to put in something much more fair that furthers fair housing. And we have some really great stuff about it. It's just a matter of making it happen. But I will say the Housing Authority is increasingly better about using their discretion in terms of who they allow into different programs.
Thank you.
Mayor Walker, there are no other hands raised at this time.
Can I just comment on that last comment? I do want to just share, I understand that our staff, and maybe Dr. Richardson can talk to it further, but they're actively working on things that will provide assistance. And we're looking at our existing CAF funding, which we have left over from some of our surpluses, as well as some that got kicked back because of a project that didn't go through. And so just want the community to be aware that those are things that are being considered, and I hope that they'll be able to be shared publicly in the near term. But Dr. Richardson, do you want to share any more about that?
No, not at this time. I think you expressed it. We do have funding in those areas, as you said, which were carryovers that are still in the budget for FY21.
And unlike a traditional CAF consideration, I think that we're going to be looking at different ways to use those monies to address just the things that Mr. Collins was raising, I think.
You're correct.
Yeah. But again, and those things, we will take feedback. So I think something has shifted to where there are people who think that because we started a discussion that we do not read all the feedback that comes into us about everything. So I just want to, just say that too, that we do take that feedback and tweak stuff accordingly and talk about it openly if we don't. So hopefully people will continue to provide feedback, as much as possible. Like only 2 comments for the budget, that's not good. And I know that Brian and his team are doing everything they possibly can, but that means that a lot of people just are not aware of, what's really happening. And in terms of equity and transparency and all of that stuff, that's a big deal, that people are engaged and that they are, that they do see this. So I know that people watch it on the other avenues that they're able to watch it on and send emails and things like that. But normally during a process like this, we would have a lot more people engaged. So it's just something for us to be aware of.
Mayor Walker, we do have another hand up at the moment.
All right. Yay, hand.
This is Rory Stolzenberg. Rory, you're live with council. Go ahead.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I guess a couple points. First off, again, thanks for holding this meeting on Zoom. I do think that the platform itself can be very accessible, but it's, I think, pretty important that we publicize that these things are happening, what the materials are for the meeting in one place, and how you can access the meeting via just a regular phone line, which is a feature that Zoom supports. But I think as it is right now, because you still have to fill out the online web form to enroll in the webinar, you still have to go online and fill out the form in order to get an email with the phone number to call in. So while you shouldn't need to have to use the internet to participate in this meeting, because of that one form step to sign up, it does still seem necessary. But I think that's just part of the learning curve for something like this, and I'm hopeful that we can make this a much more transparent and open platform than in-person meetings were. Another point, so I noticed on the CIP, which again, I didn't really see the meeting materials till pretty recently, but I see that the garage has been largely shifted into fiscal year 22, with $2 million remaining in fiscal year 21. And we had previously been told by staff that they were on a very tight schedule that couldn't take any amount of shift in order to meet the deadline to deliver those parking garage spots to the county. Given, obviously, the current situation, I'm curious what the thinking is in shifting part of the funds later, whether the city would consider working with the county to find a better solution for that, and a better solution on a more reasonable time frame, especially obviously since the garages have been empty for the last month and a half, and it's not clear that that's going to change. So I guess the budget presentation hasn't quite happened yet, but I'm very interested to hear more about that and other budget items. Thanks.
And I'll just add the first part. I couldn't get on today, and I probably just missed the email, but that was the first time that I encountered that form. So I emailed as I was signing on that was the process, and I did have some questions about it. So I understand what you're saying, and I don't know if there's a workaround because it's the first time I'd ever seen it. But I asked about a phone line early on too, because I understand that may be the only way that some people could, potentially, call in. I'm thinking of like Miss Carey, how often she's at a council meeting and we haven't heard from her on one of these, Zoom meetings. And so, Mr. Gaines, people like that who just won't be able to probably navigate the Zoom platform. So we have been having those discussions.
Also, I tried to figure out how to invite somebody who I knew had an interest in things to comment and to register for the Zoom webinar. And it took me quite a bit of clicking around before I finally found a link that I could find a link for myself as a participant, but for somebody else to join in, I finally found one on the calendar on the new website. But the combination of the fact that the website is new and a number of other things relating to that, I wonder if there's some way to put like on the initial sign-in page, rather than after you've clicked around a bunch of times, the initial sign-in page to say, here are the meetings that are coming up right away, and here's how you can click participate.
I just wanted to say that, Brian Wheeler and his team, they continue to do a great job in terms of trying to communicate our meetings to the public. if it isn't through 360, our various means of social media that we do have, that these meetings are provided to the public in terms of the time and how we're going to be operating at this present time with COVID-19. Now, I understand that there will be some learning curves, but this is new for all of us in these current times. But he's doing a really good job in terms of getting the information out to the public.
No, I think they are doing, I agree.
And I think another barrier to public participation, which I think makes all of it tough, is just that people are so overwhelmed and sort of burnt out. I've talked to a number of people who normally follow, local stuff closely, and they're just like, listen, like, I don't have the mental energy to follow this stuff, which is just baked into all of this.
It is. I don't have the mental energy.
Yeah.
But, so I understand. That's why I think it's very important for us to make sure that we don't, make decisions that, are not, that we make those equitable and just decisions. And that's sort of what I was saying when we talk about ramping up. I don't know where you all landed in that conversation either, but boards and commissions, it's hard we know how hard we work and how often we are in meetings, and we do not need to be in those 1,000,001 meetings all the time, but we're there. But it's a challenge even under normal times. So now I just can't imagine ramping that stuff back up full gear. But I also understand that business has to be taken care of, but there has to be some balance there.
I just wanted to say that relative to the budget materials, just so the public is aware that, as I think Brian said at the very beginning, all of these budget materials are available from our website under the budget section. And like tonight, for example, all the presentations that are being shown right now are available in one succinct page on our website.
And
I think that's due to that some people are having a challenge. Go ahead.
And I also like to address the second question in terms of, the funding of the parking garage and why it's empty. Why it's empty because nothing is open at this time. And secondly, our employees aren't here. Everybody's teleworking. And then thirdly, on top of that is that, asking about how we, are managing that capital project. One of the things is this is why we got it down to that amount. We've worked with the county times, and it does go up in 22. Substantially, but that gives us a chance to get back on our feet and see how the economy is doing at that time. And then we may have to do another adjustment with the county to be able to get it done. But these are all things that we've been looking at, all funding, all of our revenue and expenditures. We've been looking at everything in terms of trying to look at ways that we can cut here and cut there in order for us to survive until we get back in better financial health.
Okay. Is there anyone else?
There are no other hands raised.
Okay. If people come on and they send messages, could you just let us know if people, because it's after 5 now for people who are still working and things like that? Could you just let us know? Because we'll do another one at the end. But I think if people have comments, then we can let them comment.
Sounds good.
And I think there's an approach we could take by just maybe leveraging even some of our staff. If we provide a number to people and someone on our council staff even might be able to just put those questions into this. I mean, I'm even happen to be, I can't answer the phone. I'm saying if someone wants to call in and have their comment relayed to us, and I can imagine it's challenging to do that alongside all these other formats. But if we have someone that could then input it and then it's part of our dialogue, that's something I'd be open to exploring.
And I think before someone talking, I think there was and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a possibility, the phone was definitely a possibility, but there was concerns about, if there were how to disconnect, I guess, prank calls or something like that that would have to be a part of the discussion.
Sure. The practice we've been using the past several weeks has been, I make sure that the clerks to council have a phone number. So if anyone calls them and says, how can I participate? via telephone, that number is available and can be shared. I would say there is concern by staff that openly advertising a public phone number to a Charlottesville City Council meeting could have some unexpected consequences.
What if the number was put in utility bills?
Well, those don't go out on a timely basis, and it's not the same number for each webinar.
Well, we can process that some more.
Yeah, I think where we're trying to draw the line, or I guess replicate that experience of somebody coming in front of City Council. They're identifying themselves either traditionally by being physically present and signing their name that they want to speak, or they're visible to you so you know who is speaking. And if it's anonymous phone callers, we have had some pranksters on other webinars that we've had to remove. And it's certainly possible to remove people quickly, and we do that. But what I'm saying is, if you advertise a public phone number, it just creates greater opportunities for people who don't join the call with a name, and that could be one consequence.
Thank you.
Thank you and your staff, Brian. You and everyone's. I know this has been hard, but thank you.
Okay, so Brian, is there anyone else who has signed up to speak before we move on?
Not at this time.
Okay. So we can just open it up for discussion. I think that in terms of the school, I know that, Heather, you mentioned that we would, know tomorrow, but I don't know what we're going to know tomorrow.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Just what the cuts are that they're already planning. I think we need to decide if we're going to commit to the 1.3 right now, tonight. So that they know where they stand and if they're going to proceed with the cuts they already planned, or if they're going to need an additional amount of cuts and what that number is.
Well, Heather, it's no longer 1.3. We've already committed to doing the funding the 468,000 for the gift
balance of the 1.3. Sorry.
So the 875, is that?
Yes.
Okay. So we have 875 on the table. Well, look at me, we playing poker. All right. Well, we have 875 that we're discussing, 875,000, which is the remaining request from the schools. And I guess we can just go through each counselor and just, where are you on that? You want to wait longer, or are you comfortable with allocating that to from the reserves today?
I can go.
75.
Huh?
To keep with the poker metaphor, I'm all in at 875.
I also support us with 875 going forward with that tonight.
Okay. Lloyd and Michael?
I'll just say I think I'm in favor of the 875. Also, I acknowledge we're going to have to take that out of a reserve, but I also say I think that we talked about this sort of philosophically of whether it would be appropriate or possible to say, well, gee, let's wait and see how the revenues come in, and maybe you won't need all of those revenues that you're getting from the CARES Act to offset tax shortfalls. But the basic problem, as I think somebody pointed out in one of our, maybe it was Monday night, was that most of the school's revenues, most of the school's expenses are in year-long contracts that have to be made, so the contracts have to be offered by basically the first week in June, and they don't have the flexibility once the year gets going and you've got people there on contract they don't have the flexibility to say, oh, okay, we're not going to, we're going to lay you off in the middle of the contract. We don't want to be in that situation. So I'm inclined to say, let's do the 875 in addition to the 468, and we'll have to cross our fingers.
Michael?
Well, I guess, I'm certainly open to it. I mean, especially hearing that, before CARES Act money came in, there were already some reductions in the surplus that were considered reasonable. Gives me less pause about funding that amount. I mean, the only thing that makes it hard for me to say definitively, yes, that full amount is, one, getting a sense of what is the level of reduction in that reserve fund that, we would be willing to make, and then evaluating that against some of these other things that are unfunded or underfunded, around, for example, the emergency assistance fund, some of these housing programs, emergency housing needs or other things like that. Without knowing, one, what's the level of money removed from the reserve that we are comfortable with or consider, a reasonable amount, and then two, a sense of what are all the options of where that can be allocated. It's just sort of, it's hard for me to say definitively. I'm certainly open to it, but again, it's, how do we evaluate the specific trade-offs versus, again, funding the emergency assistance fund and some of these really emergency needs around, food security or homelessness or housing that could exist around COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I understand that. And I am, the only comment that I have, and Dr. Atkins, I know you and your staff are still, and the school board members, is just to make sure that if there are additional dollars that, come through CARES, or, because I'm sure, the calls that I have been on, they understand that they will probably have to do more than that one, whatever the initial package that they have. That if that happens, and while that money will have to be transferred to you all, if you end up not needing, for whatever reason, and we're over here, making decisions about how to keep people, housed temporarily and long-term, and those type of decisions, that there's just, if that conversation needs to happen, if the money is not a potential return, that you all are open to it. But I'm committed, as I've consistently said. I understand that every staff member at CCS also did not create this crisis, and they should not have to figure out how to survive it without our assistance. So I'm 100% committed to that. But I do understand that if all the if-then situations are more favorable than we are planning, which I don't think they're going to be, which is another reason that I'm saying yes to that, that if we have to have some conversations later in the year, that everyone's open to those.
Yeah, and on Monday, I did speak to that similarly, in that if there was the sales tax losses weren't as significant, kind of along those lines, that we just have to have an agreement with this, that we're going to recognize that this is the broader good of where we can flush these dollars. If that comes in a different place, then let's think about how we can get that back into the city's funds. So.
Yeah. Is Dr. there?
I do have a question, and I do understand that the revenue is limited right now, and I do appreciate the support from City Council. As we think about the CARES Act funding, I do want to leave with the understanding that we could potentially use some of that funding also to buy devices, or to continue our nutrition program, or something that is directly related to the needs of our students, our families, or our staff. because of COVID-19.
Yes, and I think all understand that. What my concern is that there are major positions, for the city, like equity office for the entire city that I would be advocating during any budget strongly for, that I'm putting on hold to make sure that we can keep the staff members that are currently employed. So we're not adding, any new staff positions. And so just like if you all decided that there was extra money and that we want to add staff positions that we originally didn't have or things like that. So that's it. But we all get it. I think we all get it.
I just want to, on behalf of our staff and teachers and everyone in our families, thank you. Thank you for the support. And we will live up to the trust that you put in us.
Dr. Atkins, can you remind everyone when your meeting is tomorrow, just in case people want to participate remotely?
Yes, our school board meeting starts at 5:00 tomorrow afternoon.
And how are people participating? Like, is that, obviously it's not going to be.
It is Zoom, and they can log in with Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, again, I'm comfortable with this allocation, and I understand the situation, and support it and understand that. But I do just want us to always keep in mind these other funding areas around the Emergency Assistance Fund, the $400,000 in non-bondable expenditures for the beginning of Friendship Court redevelopment that's been delayed, and the fact that we don't have information yet from our input from nonprofits and housing providers about what, if anything, could be changed around Vibrant Community Fund and CAF and emergency housing needs. And I think as we get that information in, we're going to find that there are needs that go beyond the existing funding level in Vibrant Community Fund and CAF. And, I think we all recognize that, but it's just, I think we're going to encounter very difficult situations there, as we've already encountered with the schools. It's just that we haven't received as much specific information about it yet.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that, it's all just, going to be pretty bleak for a while. And it's so important for us to keep our citizens stable during this time, because if they're not stable, then the schools will have a completely different, issue to deal with whenever they return to schools. So, like, looking at this holistically, I completely understand what you're saying, and I think we're all saying that.
Yeah, and holistic is certainly the word, because we need the schools to be as ready to go and as strong as possible when those kids do go back. It's going to be hand in hand, all of those programs working together as we recover.
I would also like to say, it occurs to me that if in fact the school system's revenues from sales taxes are a little bit better than what they're currently pessimistically expecting, odds are that our sales tax revenues will also be better than what we are currently expecting. So there may, I'm not sure that I would say that we should have any expectation that the schools would be looking, that we'd be looking to have the schools kick back money to us if they end up doing better. I suspect that there will be plenty of other things that they could find that would need to have money spent on it in order to get back to normal operations. So I wouldn't want to have any of our comments taken as some notion that the school system needs to sit there and justify every dollar to us going forward as they go through their through their year.
Yeah, I'm certainly not asking to justify, but I do want to make sure that we are all thinking about what our department leaders and Dr. Richardson and, his lead staff, what they're having, the other deputies are having to go through to make sure that cuts are happening on the school level, on the at our city level also. So we can't say that it happens here and then fund everything the opposite direction. Like, we all need to be mindful that we can't do everything maybe that we were considering doing, because we are going to have these increased expenses. And if there's no money to keep people in, you know, hotels or fed or emergency assistance or whatever, that's a bigger problem also than having the schools ready to go whenever there's a return. We're going to have a whole host of other problems. So I'm just asking that we all are mindful about that. And I get it, and I think that the employees work hard every year, and that they shouldn't be the ones sacrificed because of COVID-19. So,
Could I ask some questions about the CIP budget, Madam Mayor? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, looking at the budget that was presented, documents presented to us, that I read this morning. There's a difference in the amount that we're seeking in a bond issue by about $3 million. Why is that being cut by $3 million?
Most of that is because of the moving of the timing of the funding for the General District Court and the parking garage. So as many bonds were not needed to balance out the bondable projects that we now are showing, because we had moved those to 22. So there's a corresponding increase in 22.
Right. So I guess are the garage and the courts being moved to 2022 I guess my initial thought was, gee, that was a way of saving money out of the budget, but then it's not coming out of the general fund. So what's the need to move it to 2022?
The only thing that it does is because those are bondable projects over the 5 years, it really doesn't make any difference. We just simply looked at the timing of the expenditures, and because we were going through the exercise for the cash projects and the other things, we looked at the timing of the expenditures and just more closely aligned them with when we actually needed to sell the bonds. Initially, when we put those budgets in an effort to, sway the big dip, ebbs and flows in debt service and capital expenditures, we had split them 50-50, not knowing the real schedule. And now that we're closer to, a schedule, we just, in talking to the county, we put those in a more accurate timing.
So the reason basically is we don't need it yet.
Correct.
Okay. Although I wonder whether, given current market conditions, whether there would be any thought that if we're going to building it now, we might get more favorable bids from people. The sooner, given an overall downturn, would we be better off to do more of it earlier?
So the one thing with bonds that give us some flexibility is that we cannot proceed with a bond sale until we come back to council. We also, because we're selling tax exempt bonds, we are bound by rules within the IRS in terms of the times of sale. So in other words, you can't sell bonds and just sit on them. We have to wait until the construction has started. So if in fact we do move that timing up and we are ready to go faster than what we currently are looking at, we certainly could come back and move that bond sale up sooner.
Okay. Then I note that there is an increase of $750,000 in the amount allocated for the Smith Pool air quality corrections. What's the story behind that?
I'll let Paul speak to that.
So what we've done is we have drawings that are designed complete to 100%. So that gives us a pretty accurate engineer's estimate. And while our wild guess at 1.5 million before we went into investigating what the source of the equipment failures were, after we've gone through the exercise of having mechanical engineers evaluate the systems and come up with a design, it appears that the invitation for bid will be at $2.25 million for the corrections.
So basically just, we know better now.
We do. We've cracked the engine open and we know what's wrong.
So my only concern there, and I think I have to announce that I'm an employee, Mr. Blair?
Well, I think you just did.
Okay. I didn't know if I need to read the whole thing. Find
No.
that.
You know,
If we put it off and we have people go back into the building, that is a problem. Because it's even worse than the people who work in that building every day, they know, like we know how bad it is in the building. And so if we put this off until next budget cycle and we send people back into the building, that means that you're asking people to deal with those working conditions, and that shouldn't be the case.
I agree with you, Mayor.
but as I interpret it, that's looking to spend the additional money in this upcoming year. In other words, that's not being delayed.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, it's scheduled in FY21.
Yeah. So we're not talking about delaying it. We're talking about just putting more money into it in this upcoming fiscal year.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. I've had a rough week, clearly. I don't know.
Can we stop? I mean, no one's in the building now. I wish we could just get going now.
Yeah. I agree.
I think those are the only questions. And the other things, there are a bunch of things that, for obvious reasons, we're pushing off into FY22. But I'm assuming that things like the parks and schools, playground renovations, and parkland and trails acquisition development, that these are things that folks are comfortable with the idea that we don't desperately need to do this year and we can put off next year, given that those are, as I'm looking at this, those are non-bondable projects. They have to be put off because we don't have any money.
One note I will make about some of those cash funded projects, such as the school's playground replacements, is that those some of those accounts do, I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but some of those accounts do have balances that have been built up that they can continue to use through FY 20 and into FY 21 and to spend down those balances. We just wouldn't be to go through those projects. We just wouldn't be adding more projects to that list that they already have. So they would just be spending through those funds and reprioritizing in that way. Then
I know that one of the other things being deferred is the Friendship Court redevelopment phase 1, $394,841. What is going on with Friendship Court that causes that to be a reasonable thing to do?
Again, that was just a decision by the fact that we're putting no cash in CIP, and that is a cash funded piece of that. And so we did reach out to Sunshine, Brenda and I, and made him aware of that, and he thought it was something they could work with. But to your point, it is deferring.
And I'm looking at it looks like in FY22 we would be talking about a total of about $5.6 million on 3 different line items going to Friendship Court.
Yeah, and if you also notice at the top, there's as was with the original proposed budget as well, but just to draw everyone's attention, there are big cash commitments in 22 and 24, primarily because of the funding of that one project.
Right.
2 million plus. So that's a big commitment to the general fund, especially in a year after a pandemic. So I just want to make sure that, you're aware.
Yeah. Okay.
And
questions I had about capital budget. Thanks.
And I think that in terms of just both CRHA and Friendship Court projects, that I just hope the communication with those teams is that because when we're talking about housing and equity and all of those things, that's what their projects are doing. And so if they are ready, then that is a conversation I definitely want to have, and not just have them believe that they need to wait until the next fiscal year to discuss that with us.
What is it? Is every piece of the Friendship Court redevelopment in the CIP non-bondable?
It is. And John, I don't know if you want to speak to the legality of why that is.
Simply, it's the bondable projects have to be public projects, and they would not fall within that definition.
And then CRHA's redevelopment is bondable. So in a sense, it's a little less uncertain at the moment. Or at least at this time, the allocations for it haven't been deferred like they have for Friendship Court.
Correct. And to the mayor's point, if something happened that, they accelerated their schedule and they were able to do things because it is bondable, because council does have to approve those, we can always change the timing. But again, those allocations were just put in based on timing that we were aware of.
Right. So, and I do just want to highlight, I am very, very, very nervous about the future of this Friendship Court redevelopment, because they have already been flexible beyond this year and trying to defer some things and be flexible. And in fiscal year 2022, we are bumping up the non-bondable contribution to $7.8 million in 1 year. And I know, in conversations with Sunshine, he's been very flexible, but I know, there's nervousness around even deferring that $400,000 this year. And I think, in my mind, there seems to be a lot more uncertainty about our capacity to fund that $7.8 million next fiscal year than maybe is recognized at the moment. And that is going to potentially throw off a lot of things in terms of the low-income housing tax credits and just how that project is financed. And, for me, that's like a top priority, that we do not make that project not able to happen. And I look at that number all hitting us in fiscal year 2022, and I'm very, very nervous.
I think we also, I think we could have done a better job. Looking at, talking about this earlier in the year about the fact that, those commitments were made up front for each year versus that we would consider those in our request every year. That was a point of confusion for me, that I was not aware that we had, because we would not be able to tie other councils to those dollar amounts. So my thought process had us that considering those numbers annually, knowing that phases 1 through 3 were going to occur, but that on their end, they were also doing their work with fundraising and getting, other sources of revenue in for the project. So I think this is something that we need to, discuss. It would be harder. They had better financial outlook than CRHA going into this, but now with this current climate, all of that probably, has changed also.
Well, and I know with just the changes and everything going on, and in conversations I had, the expectation is fully that the value, what's happening with the value of low-income housing tax credits, is going to drive the price of any projects involving LIHTC up, and so the gap is just going to grow. It's not going to go down from what it is. And what makes me just really nervous about it is CRHA's is bondable, Friendship Courts is not bondable. And I'm just very concerned that we end up in a situation where we've been planning this and say we're going to do it, and we've put ourselves in a position where once again we have to say, oh, we're delaying it for another indefinite amount of years, which is just something we've done for decades. And I would just hate, with the amount of attention and work that's gone into both of these projects, both CRHA and Friendship Court redevelopment, that I just want us to be aware of that risk. So we're thinking, years ahead and doing everything we can to prevent us from being in a situation where it doesn't happen like we said it would.
And I think with PHA's current commitment of, ensuring that people at the 60%, I think they're at 60 now, I can't keep, but income limit, like with that goal, that is serving, some of the most vulnerable people that we have in the area, that we would always, or should always be open to what that conversation, needs to be, while also understanding that what I thought was going to happen every year, it is not the case. So, but I'm committed to the project because of who they're serving and that their commitment to it. Back in 2015, I would have been less so when they were considering selling and everything else, but Sunshine is, operating very differently. So I hope that we all would be on that same page, but I do understand what you're saying, Michael. I think as this year continues that we're going to have a lot of these type of conversations about everything.
Right, and again, I just want to flag it so it's something that we're all really thinking seriously about. A much smaller CIP question is just the 93,000 for the downtown mall improvements. What sort of specifically are those improvements?
I might have this list.
So that, Paul, I don't know if Paul's still on the call, but Paul could explain a little bit better, but I believe those projects are for the infrastructure projects. Like if there's areas, the drainage runnels I know need to have problems that need to be worked on and replaced. So it's building up funds to work on those. If there's areas where the mall needs to be re-bricked, I believe, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also potential for furniture, trash can replacement, that kind of stuff. It's just minor infrastructure stuff. Maybe even the fountains, if those the pump mechanisms have issues and things like that because of all the coins that get thrown into the pumps, those kind of things to replace those. Paul, am I leaving anything out?
There's some tree issues.
Correct.
That's
I think you should work for Parks and Rec, Brian.
I'll just throw it out. I mean, I know every decision we have to make is difficult. I understand those come from downtown mall vendors' fees, but just thinking that's a non-bondable expenditure and thinking about, that priority versus, some of these emergency assistance funds and other things. I'll just throw that out there. But, and then a final point, and I know I may be a lone dissenter on this, but I still think, even as a bondable project, that the downtown garage is just a project that to me does not make sense. And I feel very strongly that 20, 30 years from now, it's the kind of project people will look back on and think like, what the heck were they thinking? I think this is a project driven not by serious planning considerations, but rather a political deal. And that's the kind of project that doesn't have a good history. I mean, I think we're able to meet that courts agreement without building a new garage. I think part of it is being driven because the new garage is considered as a good economic development opportunity for downtown businesses. I know it's been a priority for DBAC for a number of years to have a new garage. And it's not being driven by data. We can meet the courts agreement without it. The courts agreement is strictly a political deal, not driven by good planning. And again, with 10.5 square miles, our publicly owned land is perhaps the most valuable resource we have. And we're using some of our very, very limited publicly owned land to raise two businesses, one of them a minority owned business, to build a parking garage on land that may not even be good land or location for a parking garage when you consider some of the entrances and exits onto the street. So I have no illusions about us becoming a car-free city. I fully recognize people are going to continue to drive, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But even with that in mind, I do not support funding that parking garage, but I understand I may be a lone dissenter there.
Or not a lone dissenter.
And I'll just say from the 3 outgoing counselors, Heather and I was new to this process. And I understand that there was a lot of messiness with this process that we missed just because of the time that we came in on. And as I have stated, where we have received a lot of emails over the past year for people who oppose that project, who are the, like car-free city type of, that have the car-free city type of process, climate change and things like that. we started getting a lot of communications from the legal community. So the attorneys, judges, those type of communications about how challenging it would be for them to, I know one of the locations the county was considering was the, Fresh Market or something was right there. Is that Seminole Trail? That was one of the locations that, for the staff to travel from downtown to their public defenders, and the biggest impact that I saw with everything that I read and having worked at, as one of the clinicians for drug court, I really understood, like, if I had to run from the city drug court to the county drug court or something like that, so I understood what they were saying, that and something that I said before was the only time some of these public defenders, for whatever reason, I'm not going to talk about them today because I just don't have enough energy, but get to look at their clients' files is in between cases. So that is why I voted for it. Listening to the other counselors about, the commitment that they had put into resolving it when things were falling completely apart, and then listening to the legal community, because in my world, we wouldn't need as much, attorneys and judges and stuff, because people would not be going through criminal and civil trials all the time. But since that is not the world either, that you want to not limit, the time that, people can spend and the travel time for those individuals, and especially when you're talking about the ones that work for the most vulnerable people in the city. So that's why I made the decision. So I'll just say it again.
I want to push back a little bit on some of the emails in particular that we've been getting. We are not in 2020 or even in 2022 going to be ready to be a car-free city. And for us to think that we are is ludicrous. The issue of whether we could get by with taking other spots off the market, which is what we would have to do in order to give, the proposal has been that we say, okay, fine, we'll go ahead and take the lot at 7th Street and give that over to the county. Well, we've got people who are parking there right now, so those people have to go someplace else. We've got a lot of needs for where people are going to park in the next few years, and those needs aren't going away, and those needs can't be just wished away. And we don't have the infrastructure at this point, and won't for at least 5 years, by my estimation, to be able to provide other parking spaces. Yes, it is true the agreement only requires us to provide 90 or 100 parking spaces. And yes, it is true that this does more than provide 90 or 100 parking spaces, but it is also true that we've got, as best I can determine from the amount of money and the amount of expenditures being made on new office buildings in downtown Charlottesville in the next, construction currently underway, we're going to look at probably thousands of additional employees coming downtown, and they're not all, there's not going to be enough parking provided by the people who are building the buildings, and it's not realistic to think that they're all suddenly going to start taking buses. A lot of them live in the county, a lot of them are coming in, we've got to have some place to put them. I just don't think it's a realistic thing to think that we're going to say we're not going to build the parking garage. I'll add two other thoughts. One is that one of the important points I think that we cannot lose sight of is that we have been, in this respect, on this parking garage in particular, the county regards us and has said so publicly as not a reliable negotiating partner, that we make deals and then we don't follow through on them. And it is, I think, absolutely important that we try to reestablish the notion that we are going to be a reliable negotiating partner. The final point I would make is that it is expected from life expectancy projections that the current parking garage on Market Street may not last a whole lot longer anyway. And maybe by the time we're ready to move to a more bike, more car, my bike, pedestrian, bus oriented transportation culture, maybe it'll be time to replace the current Market Street parking garage, in which case we will now have a parking garage across the street that we would be able to use. So there are a lot of reasons. I think, number one, it was a good decision 3 or 4 years ago when it was first made. Number two, it's a good decision now. And number three, we ought to go ahead and keep it in the plan and go ahead and get it started.
And the last point that Lloyd made was actually one of the ones that really put me over the edge in realizing that was the direction. I mean, as much as Nakia said it was messy before us, it was even messy with us. But it was really just recognizing that that other parking garage is going to have a lifespan that's going to expire, and that in the future we'll have a much bigger opportunity there. But in this current state, I agree, we do not have the capacity in the downtown area. And I know that in prior meetings and our prior council, we actually had our parking manager come and speak to this and talk about the supply and the demand that we have. And so I think that's a fruitful thing to kind of refresh everyone's mind about if we have the opportunity. But I certainly, given the history here and what Nakia and I have gone through, as well as all the reasons that have been just laid out, I'm continue to be in support of this being in our CIP.
Well, and I guess just the final thing I'll say about it is I think there's a lot of false binaries there. I mean, there's certainly people who have emailed us, who think, who one is a goal of car-free city. Certainly think it's a good goal, but I fully recognize it's not going to happen anytime soon. People are going to keep driving. Like that's just going to happen. And I also agree that it's very important to keep the courts downtown. As we all know, this was all initiated by Albemarle County threatening to move their courts as a negotiating tactic to get the city pony up for, money for infrastructure improvements, et cetera, related to courts they wanted. So it was an effective negotiating tactic. It resulted in this deal, but the deal does not require building a parking garage. It requires providing a specific number of parking spaces. And I don't think we've seen any concrete data showing that the only way to meet the parking spaces that deal requires is through building a new garage. For example, I understand it may be data that's not able to be collected, but even just a sense of how many people currently using the garage are already going to the downtown courts. So what capacity in the garage is already being filled by that clientele? And I know, granted, it's several years old, but the last actual parking study done for the city explicitly recommended not building new parking spaces and said we have a parking management problem, not a parking space problem. And so I just continue to think we can meet the deal, not have the courts move without needing to build a new parking garage. And I just think in city planning, parking spaces is one of the areas where there's the biggest gap between what the data shows and what the public perception is. I brought this up before, but I think it's sort of just a striking statistic from Richmond's last parking study that 41% of their land downtown is used for parking. Peak utilization, when most people are using parking spaces, is 67% of space is used during the day, 69% at night, and yet 73% of people say there's not enough parking. So I think even if we build this, we'll still have people saying we need more parking. It's a disaster. We got to do it. And I understand, I'm in the minority here, but I just feel strongly there's not data to support it. And 20 to 30 years from now, when people look back around us using our public land and raising minority-owned affordable corner store, some of the only affordable restaurants on the downtown mall, on the main entrance corridor to the downtown mall, people will think they won't care about the weird political deals that resulted in it. It'll just be bad planning. But that's my piece.
All right. And my decision making here was about people and if there were two different court systems, in different places and not in the same proximity. And that if it hadn't happened, that the county was going to move out of the area and what that would do to low income and the most vulnerable people who are primarily the people who fill the court system was why I made my decision. So it wasn't about whether they have parking spaces.
And I agree. And again, I think that deal can be met without the courts moving, without building a garage. But we are where we are.
The deal is the garage. There are some subtleties there.
Now it is, but
Yeah.
But we could always provide the spaces without it.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Okay. Do we have any questions about anything else?
Remind me again, our next step. So we aren't talking budget again until the
We're
18th.
talking tomorrow. We are.
Oh, we have 221s.
221s. Yes.
Do we?
They should be quick, right?
Yes, we have 221s tomorrow.
221s tomorrow.
Well, mine got removed from my calendar somehow.
Oh, yeah?
A cancellation came to me and I was like, what happened to my 221? So who was I with? Is anyone, were any of you with
Mr.
me?
Snook.
Snook, do you have it on yours?
I got both a cancellation and a new entry on my calendar. I think I'm set at 3:00 with Ms. Walker, if I recall.
Oh. So something must have gotten rescheduled. Could you give me a time when you have a chance to run?
Yes, I'll get it straight now.
All right, so I guess we'll see if there are any more public comments.
If you're on the webinar and you want to address council, click the raise your hand icon. And Mayor Walker, are you going to entertain repeat customers?
Sure.
Rory Stolzenberg, you're on the call of council. Go ahead.
Hey, Roy, it's always a pleasure. Roy, are you there?
Rory, you can unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had you on double mute. I figured since you were on the topic, I'd chime in since I've looked into this a whole bunch. And we need to clarify a couple topics or a couple points on the garage. So first off, I think nobody is suggesting doing anything other than abiding by the courts agreement and keeping the courts downtown. And that courts agreement asks for a 90 space parking structure on that lot on Market Street. And there is an out to provide 100 spaces in the Market Street garage, but I think it's intended more as a temporary thing if construction isn't complete in time. But it won't be complete until November of 2023. So it is some time off in the future. And I think the optimal scenario, if we really think through and plan out rather than rushing to meet this 4-year schedule we were on, is to think through an option that potentially provides those spaces on Market Street and also provides a productive use above it that also brings in revenue to be fiscally responsible for the city that offsets the cost. Because no, we're probably not going to get rid of cars completely by 2025. But the thing, we're certainly not going to do it if the government is spending $10 million or $15 million really all in on a huge, massive expenditure to subsidize, that form of transit while other ones like actual transit cost money. And one other quick point on the Market Street garage with the end of life. So facilities management came to place late last year, and they clarified that in 2015 we put about $500,000 into concrete rework into the Market Street garage, and that bought it another 20 years of life, and that can almost certainly be repeated. So come 2035, most likely faced with leaving the status quo for a relatively small amount of money or a big project, it'll be a conversation just like this, except leaving it in place, and they'll stick with that. So it really is kind of a generational issue of whether we go through this decision on the other side of Market Street, straight across, and tear down 2 local businesses in the process. But
And I'll just, add in terms of, we haven't spent a lot of time on it, but I know Dr. Richardson, we've had conversations about, what reimagining those spaces could look like if the parking needs were met on the other side of the street too. So there are thoughts about what's possible in, those 3 buildings that's owned by the city, looking at that long term. So I'll just stop there, but there have been conversations about that.
Yeah, and I think it would be really productive to take the same attitude and look across the street, where I think we could do a similar thing. It's right next to the S&P building, which is already pretty large. But right now we're going with just a 3-story garage, just for parking cars, and only 3 stories, only because that's what the by right zoning allows. And staff didn't feel like they had time to come and ask council for a special use permit to do more. And I think that's a little bit of a mistake. And we can build a better project even in a pretty short time frame, and save a lot of money to boot, and still adhere to the agreement and keep the courts downtown. That's my hope anyway. Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you. And I'll say on my end, just to make a comment, not for a conversation, but I did bring up during my conversation with staff about, and making sure that the 2 businesses that were potentially displaced, that if they talked to them about creating space for them, because there was a conversation that creating space for a restaurant is very different from retail space. So I had that conversation, and about if we could fit, apartments in that space too. So we didn't just, and I wasn't in the meeting with Councilor Hill, but I'm sure that there were questions asked too. So we didn't just say, go ahead with it. I did ask a lot of questions too about what else could go in that space.
And I'll just say, if it unfortunately must be built, I, for one, am 100% open to looking at the zoning if there is a way through that process to make it a better project that includes businesses and or housing, as well as addresses some of the issues that I think that site is particularly ill-suited for garage because of how it enters onto streets. If there's any way to address that issue through the zoning as well. I'm not committed to that by right zoning if it makes it a worse project.
Has there been any active thought as to what kind of thing we might be able to do there? Whether, again, we might have to redo the zoning, but let's take a look at that and try to figure out, should there be 3 levels of parking and 4 levels of apartments or something on top of that? Or are there other things that we could do that would make sense?
When I'm in my meeting with Chris and Rick about this, I believe they had a white paper from a designer which did look at that, and it was going to be approximately $5 million more to build the infrastructure to support additional housing on top.
And there were issues with it being, I guess, one part of the land there. There were some issues that they discussed with me. And again, this is not my field, so we didn't, have a conversations outside of that team about it. And maybe is Paul still on the call? Maybe he wants to chime in here.
And Paul, when you chime in, can you also speak to the Market Street market status? Because I respectfully disagree with that comment, and I think you might have more information around its useful life.
Sure, I'll start with Market Street. So typically, when you look at a parking structure, it would have 10 years service life left into it, and it's teetering over. When do you stop putting money into a structure that ultimately is going to have to be replaced? So the last investment in the concrete repairs to buy us to 20 years, and that is a very generous estimate based on some of the structural issues that you'll encounter. Things like how hard are the winters, how much salt's drug into the parking deck. But there are certainly, we were looking at having the deck replaced within the 10 to 20 year, not at 20 years. If you move across the street, we did look at, the potential for affordable housing on top of the parking. And there would be an increase in the cost of it. And I don't believe it was $5 million. I think it was more along the lines of about $1.5 million or $2 million to go ahead and have the parking deck reinforced so that you could build additional structure above for affordable housing or whatever you would choose. There are other issues building the deck in terms of ingress and egress and some of the considerations when you look at the signal at 7th Street and Market, and things are already chaotic at 5 o'clock at rush hour. So we're looking at some alternatives on Park Street and High Street to alleviate some of the traffic congestion. So that would be additional infrastructure. We did do an analysis of what would it be like if we just used the surface lot and decided not to build the deck in the short term and then push all the parking over to Market Street. And so part of that was that we would lose the revenue generated by that 100 spaces that we would have to forfeit. So we would be essentially impacting the enterprise fund for the parking deck. And then lastly, the restaurants and putting retail space, I believe there was 12,000 square feet of retail space that's programmed in the parking deck currently.
One, what is that amount of revenue loss that there, even just roughly, that there would be in the parking fund? And two, are there any constraints you see currently based around the zoning that changing it in any way could open up other opportunities, or is that not really a factor at this point?
It's not, yes, definitely changing the zoning. You could add additional stories above. We were just looking at what met the terms of the agreement and what retail space could we generate, and then having a pro forma based on the garage, it would essentially pay for itself over time.
I have nothing else.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other individuals, citizens signed up for public comment?
Not at this time.
Okay, so are there any closing comments?
I'll just throw out again, sort of in the spirit of like thinking more long term with the Friendship Court redevelopment. I think, it's not, doesn't impact this budget cycle, but I think it's something we really need to start thinking about now. Is our low-income housing tax credit properties. They're going to see their affordability periods expire over the next several years, and what budgetary impact that could have if we are committed to trying to preserve those properties as affordable. For example, Midway Manor, within really the next just couple years is slated, that affordability period ends. And there is some indication that that developer intends to turn the entire Midway Manor into market rate. And obviously, I think that would be pretty disastrous. And we need to start thinking about what that looks like to try and prevent that. And that's just going to be a major budgetary impact over the next several years. I think Midway Manor is the one that is most immediate, but there are a number of others as well, because the program is just structured. If you use low-income housing tax credits, the developer only needs to keep it affordable for a set number of years. So a lot of these developers, they just view it as a profit-making opportunity. They'll just flip it once it ends.
And that's why we need to ensure that all the money that we spend through CAF and through, that we support with these other projects, like even PHA, because that property was, and that's why I really like the work that Sunshine does, but that's why I'm just a stickler for making sure that we have those discussions, because we have no control over what they do once those credits run out. And if we put better parameters in place for things we fund, we can, help them think about a different process. But someone was supposed to check on Midway Manor and give us an update or look at the projects in the area, right? At some point. Didn't we have that discussion?
Well, I know John Sayles was originally brought this issue up with the hack, and I know it's something he's been following for a while, and he has a list of all the properties and when they're set to expire. But I don't think we ever I don't think we ever expected like a presentation or anything about it, at least at this point. But I know it's something that John Sales has been monitoring.
Councilors, this is Alex. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How about you? I think Midway Manor, there are a couple of years away. I think they still have up to December 2022, either 2021 or 2022, before the low-income tax credit expires. On a related note, I think the point that Michael brought up and yourself, the mayor, is pretty critical in terms of trying to safeguard the expiring low-income housing tax credit. Now, council need to start thinking about that. And then, as we move into the future, when the this coronavirus situation ends, you may want to start thinking about how to set some money aside so that those low-income housing tax credit that are expiring, sometimes some of them may need additional funding, for renovation. And if the city council can provide that additional funding, then you can extend in lieu of the money, the affordability period for another 5, 10, or 15 years, So that is something that we may want to start thinking about as we move into the future.
And it would be helpful for us to know because December 2022 is soon. So, Mr. Blair, are we able to contact the owner to just see what their intentions are, just so that we can know? And then if their intentions are to keep it low income, what supports they would be seeking to do that?
Certainly, the city can contact the owners. I think there are, well, and certainly you can inquire as to what their plans, or as Mr. Ikafunas stated, if they have any renovations that they're thinking about. But obviously that comes back to council if you want to look at making appropriations to renovate, and as part of that renovation agreement, extending the affordability period.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any other comments before we finish before 6:30?
Mayor Walker, just procedurally, based on the council's decision tonight about...
Do we need to take a vote?
No, ma'am. No, but just the additional funding for the schools, that will be part of your, when you vote on, or when you have your budget public hearing May 18th. There will be, we can have an amendment prepared at that time to include these, but just wanted procedurally to let you know there will need to be a vote to formalize tonight.
Yes. Understood that. All right, thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Sorry to drag things out more, but one last comment is, I know on Monday we had a lot of discussion around how the CDBG money is allocated, and I just wanted to highlight that tomorrow, I think the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission is having their public hearing about it. So just to highlight that, if people are interested in attending that and sort of voicing if they would like to see that funding moved in any different directions, and that's at 7 p.m.
And now, because of coronavirus, you can attend that one and attend the school board meeting via computer if you have 2 screens.
Okay. All right. Mr. Willer, do we have anyone else signed up to speak?
No one else has raised their hand.
Okay.
Oh, I did want to make a quick announcement I saw on email. Sorry. Catherine Goodman from the Thomas Jefferson Health Department. There will be a online town hall, COVID town hall on May 8th at 3:00.
Okay.
You can register for that at charlottesville.gov/Zoom.
All right. Are there any other? Nope. Okay. Well, the meeting is adjourned. We appreciate everybody's hard work and dedication.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, especially everybody working on the budget. I know everyone, but Dr. Richardson, Ms. Shelton, Ms. Hamill, Mr. Davison, we appreciate all the work that you all are doing and all the stuff that you all take from us and flip it and try to make it make sense for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So have a good evening.
Night.
You too.